So I'm Andrew Neilson, I'm Director of Campaigns at the Howard League. The Howard League is the oldest criminal reform organisation. Certainly in the UK, we think the world, no one has ever told us that they're older. So we're almost 150 years old. Behind a lot of the big criminal justice reforms in the 20th century, things like the formation of the probation service, the recognition of victims in the system, the abolition of capital and corporal punishment. And I suppose these days our primary concern is really about the size of the prison population, the fact that it has doubled since the mid-1990s, that it shows no sign of slowing down, and the impact that has on society. Our campaigning slogan is less crime, safer communities, fewer people in prison, because we believe it is possible to have all three of those things.
Thanks.
It could do. I think there are aspects to payment by results which are positive, not least the focus on outcomes rather than process, and making people think about that and incentivizing it, particularly less so in probation, which I think has always been about that, but particularly in prisons, where there has been a tendency to simply lock them up and throw away the key, and then eventually you have to release them, and it's not really our business what they then do, and we're not going to look really very hard into the impact of what we didn't do during that prison sentence that could have maybe done something to stop that person reoffending. So I think that is a welcome thing. There are complexities around what you call the outcome and how you measure it, and I'm sure we'll talk about that. But that I think is a positive thing. I think also anything which has political capital behind it, and payment by results certainly does, is useful for innovators in the system, because if they can find a way of badging their ideas under payment by results, then there is the political will and potentially some funding to experiment, and I think that will happen to a degree. Although interestingly, I suspect that the things that will be successful under payment by results in terms of innovation will not necessarily have very much to do with payment by results. They may well be these things which people have found use payment by results as a platform to work with. This is the biggest issue, which is that the government has focused on the binary reoffending rate. Yes, no, have they reoffended, have they not? They're not even looking at a slightly more sophisticated measure which takes in, say, the frequency and seriousness of reoffending, or reconvictions, because ultimately what we're talking about here is the offending that we know about and has been processed through the system. While it may make some common sense to say that's what we're going to do, and certainly there is a political argument, I think, that makes it more acceptable to simply look at have they reoffended or have they not, and pay people on that basis. In practice, I think it's too crude. It doesn't reflect the messiness of people's lives, and we are talking about people who, by definition, have messy lives. They offend, they have a lot of problems, they live chaotic existences. And we know that the road to desistance from crime is not a straight path. It's not a short path, and sometimes progress should be, in fact, measured in incremental stages rather than that kind of straight off, are they back on the straight and narrow or are they not, which is what PBR seems to be asking. And I think that's unrealistic and it will cause problems. But that's where we are. I think politically it would be more difficult to perhaps argue that there are outcomes which may seem very minor to members of the public whose lives are untouched by the criminal justice system, which would be actually pretty valuable to measure. Things like, is this individual, are they registered with a GP, that kind of thing, which actually can have a major impact on their lives and result in them not offending. But it's very small outcomes which don't necessarily have the same kind of headline appeal as a reoffending rate. I think there are two. One, as I said earlier, is it does give space for some innovation. And I think we are already seeing pilots which, to my mind, are not really about payment by results, but they are in there because that's the where the political will lies. I'm thinking particularly around the pilot in Manchester, which is effectively, unlike a lot of the other pilots where they're based around particular institutions, i.e. a prison or even a probation trust. This is an actual, it's a local area, and it's looking at the budgets across criminal justice in that area. And basically what it is justice reinvestment, it's movement from the states. It seems to be more about justice reinvestment than payment by results. In that sense, I think it's very promising, because I think that the more locally you focus things and the more holistic you are around spending, public spending generally, so not just criminal justice spending, but looking at then how you can divert that into other services. I think that has real potential, whereas I think the narrow institutional model of payment by results is slightly more problematic. My big concern is that it won't work, that the initial assumptions are flawed. For example, as I mentioned earlier, the issue of what the result is that you're looking for. We're also concerned that you could see cherry picking, so essentially providers incentivised to work with the easiest people to work with rather than the hardest. And although there is that's been acknowledged, I think, by the government, and they are looking at trying to prevent it from happening, I think it will be a constant battle to avoid the issue of cherry picking. I think it's tricky. I think it's partly tricky because of the times that we live in, which are, where really the priority for government is to make savings. They need to spend less money than they're currently spending. And there is a degree to which payment by results, big picture, makes the argument that if this works, then we will be spending less money because we'll be spending it more efficiently. But you've got to get there. And I think in the end, the pressure on budgets and simply making those savings will come first. And so it will be difficult for those piloting PBR. I do think that some of the pilots will be successful. I'm not sure they all will. But I think it's unlikely that it will be the mainstream way of commissioning over the next few years. I know that's the ambition, but I think that the reality and the ambition are yet to meet.